"Come with me now," she said. A runaway bride found a starving father of triplets and did the unthinkable. The words, spoken with a quiet authority that defied the mud on her boots and the wildness in her eyes, hung in the damp air like a prophecy. Elias did not look up from the splintered log he was failing to split. His arms trembled not from the weight of the axe, but from the cavernous emptiness in his belly. Beside him, huddled under a threadbare oilcloth draped over a low branch, were the only three things in the world that still mattered. Caleb, Noah, and little Leah, their faces pale smudges of dirt and silent endurance. They were the reason his hands were raw, the reason his back was a monument of pain, the reason his pride lay in shattered pieces at his feet. He had been a farmer once. His land had sung under his touch. Now, he was less than a ghost, haunting the edges of a town that had already buried him. The woman's shadow fell over him, eclipsing the weak afternoon sun. He could feel her gaze, not of pity, which he could have borne with rage, but of assessment, cool and unnerving. He finally lifted his head, his eyes narrowed with the suspicion of a cornered animal. She was a stranger, her traveling dress fine but stained with the grime of the road, her face framed by dark hair escaping a tight bun. There was a fierceness in her that did not belong to this defeated patch of woods. "I have food," she stated, not offered. "And shelter." For them her chin tilted towards the children. Elias's throat was too dry to speak. Food. The word was a physical blow, a dream he had stopped allowing himself. He could starve, but the thought of his children's gnawing hunger was a constant, grinding torture. Why, he managed to rasp, the sound foreign in his own ears. The woman, whose name he did not know, looked from his exhausted face to the axe lying in the dirt, then back to the shivering forms of his triplets. "Because I can," she said, the word simple, absolute. "And because no one else is. My name is Ilara. Your children will have a warm meal and a dry bed tonight. You will work for it tomorrow. That is the arrangement. Come with me." Now it was not a request. It was a command, a lifeline thrown with such force it left him no choice but to grab it, lest he and his children be swept away by the current of their despair. He rose on unsteady legs, his pride a whimpering dog at his heels, and gathered his children, their small, cold hands disappearing into his own. Ilara led them not towards the town of Blackwood Creek, but deeper into the woods, following a bare path that Elias, in all his time foraging, had never noticed. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the scuff of their feet on damp earth and the occasional, trusting sigh from Leah, whom Elias now carried. He watched Ilara's back, the straightness of her spine a testament to a resolve he no longer possessed. Every instinct screamed at him to be wary, yet the hope of a meal for his children was a siren song, drowning out all caution. After a quarter mile, the trees opened into a small, hidden clearing. There, waiting like a dormant beast, was a Conestoga wagon. It was not the wreck of a desperate traveler, but a fortress on wheels, its canvas clean and taut, its wheels thick and sturdy. It spoke of wealth, of preparation, of a purpose far beyond mere survival. Ilara unfastened the canvas flap without a word and gestured for them to look inside. Elias's breath caught. It was a miniature home, meticulously organized. Sacks of flour and beans were lashed to one side, alongside crates of dried apples and salted meat. Blankets were folded into neat, thick stacks. A small iron stove, cold for now, sat securely bolted to the floor. It was a vessel of escape, a rolling sanctuary built for a long and arduous journey. He felt a pang of profound shame, the chasm between his ruin and her resources seeming impossibly vast. "Get the children inside," Ilara commanded gently, already moving to unhitch the two strong horses that had been grazing peacefully nearby. Elias did as he was told, lifting his children into a world of unimaginable luxury. Their wide, wondering eyes took in the scent of dried herbs and clean wool. Within minutes, Ilara had a fire crackling in the stove, its warmth pushing back the relentless damp. She moved with an economy of motion, producing a pot, water from a barrel, and a slab of bacon. Soon, the wagon was filled with the sounds and smells of cooking, a domestic symphony Elias thought he would never hear again. He sat on a small stool useless and numb, watching this stranger save his family. When the thick stew was ready, she ladled it into 3 small wooden bowls and handed them to the children, who ate with a quiet, desperate intensity that broke their father's heart. Only then did she hand a bowl to Elias. "Eat," she said. "Your work begins at dawn." They settled on a forsaken sliver of land bordering the town, a muddy flat by the creek that no respectable citizen of Blackwood Creek wanted. It was public, yet private in its undesirability. From here, the town was a collection of disapproving rooftops and judgmental church spires. Ilara positioned the wagon to face the woods, its back turned to the town like a shunned parishioner. It became their island, a fragile symbol of a life pieced together from scraps. News of their arrival traveled on the wind, carried by the whispers of laundry women and the stern gossip of merchants. They saw Elias, the fallen man, the widower of Eleanor Abernathy, whose father was the wealthiest, cruelest landowner in the county. Master Abernathy had stripped Elias of his farm after Eleanor's death, citing debts and incompetence, leaving him with nothing but 3 small mouths to feed and the crushing weight of public failure. Now, here he was, living in a wagon with an unknown woman, an arrangement that stank of scandal and desperation. The townsfolk gathered to stare, their curiosity a morbid, hungry thing. They stood in clusters on the far side of the creek, their faces pinched with condemnation. Elias felt their eyes on him like hot brands as he worked, felling small trees on the patch of land Ilara now claimed as theirs. He tried to build a wall of labor around himself, letting the rhythm of the axe and the sweat on his brow be his only reality. Ilara ignored them completely. She moved about her tasks with an air of serene indifference, washing clothes in the creek, teaching the children their letters on a small slate, her composure an impenetrable fortress. One afternoon, Bailiff Thorne made his official visit. He was a portly man whose uniform was stretched taut over a belly full of self-importance. He swaggered to the edge of their camp, careful not to get his polished boots too dirty. "This is an irregular settlement," he announced, his voice booming with practiced authority. "Vagrancy is not tolerated in Blackwood Creek." Elias stopped his work, his hand tightening on the axe handle. Ilara emerged from the wagon, wiping her hands on an apron. She looked at the bailiff, her expression unreadable. "We are not vagrants," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying easily across the space between them. "We are residents." The bailiff chuckled, a short, unpleasant sound. "A wagon is not a residence, madam. And your association is a matter of public concern." His eyes flicked to Elias, dripping with contempt. "You have 1 week to move on. Master Abernathy has lodged a formal complaint." The name landed like a stone, sending ripples of fear through Elias. Abernathy was not a man to be trifled with. He was the law, even when he wasn't wearing a badge. The week passed under a sky the color of old bruises. A sense of dread settled over the camp, thick and suffocating. Elias worked with a frantic energy, trying to build a pyre of chopped wood high enough to ward off the coming darkness. He could feel Abernathy's shadow stretching from the town, a cold precursor to the man himself. The final day arrived grey and damp. Just as the bailiff had promised, he returned, but this time he was not alone. Master Abernathy rode beside him on a fine black stallion, his face a mask of cold fury. Abernathy was a man carved from granite and greed, his posture ramrod straight, his eyes like chips of ice. He dismounted with a stiff, deliberate grace, his gaze sweeping over the meager camp with undisguised disgust before settling on Elias. "I knew you were worthless," Abernathy began, his voice cutting through the quiet air, loud enough for the assembled gallery of townsfolk to hear every word. "But I never imagined you would sink to this. Living in filth. Dragging my daughter's children through the mud with this woman." He spat the word as if it were poison. "They are my blood. They bear my name. I will not have them raised by a disgraced pauper." And his roadside horde. The insult struck Elias with the force of a physical blow, and he took a half-step forward, his fists clenched, a primal roar building in his chest. But Ilara was faster. She laid a hand on his arm, a small touch that was as firm and unyielding as iron. She then turned to face Abernathy, her calm a stark contrast to his performative rage. "Bailiff Thorne," Abernathy commanded, gesturing imperiously. "I am here to reclaim my grandchildren. This man is unfit. He is a danger to them. I am their legal guardian now. The bailiff puffed out his chest, pulling a rolled document from his coat. By order of the magistrate, based on the testimony of Master Abernathy, an emergency writ of custody. His voice trailed off as Elara took a slow, deliberate step forward, her eyes locked on Abernathy. The entire clearing seemed to hold its breath. You have no authority here, Master Abernathy, Elara said. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a resonant clarity that silenced the murmuring crowd. Abernathy scoffed. Do not presume to tell me about authority, girl. I own this town. Elara offered a small, cold smile. You own a great deal, she conceded. But you do not own this. She turned, walked to the wagon, and unlocked a heavy wooden chest that Elias had never seen her open. From it, she retrieved a leather folio. She walked back to the stunned bailiff and the furious landowner, her movements unhurried. She held out a thick piece of parchment, its seals fresh and official. This is the deed to this parcel of land, she stated. 2 acres, bordering Blackwood Creek. I purchased it from the territorial office 2 months ago. You are trespassing on my property. Bailiff Thorne took the document, his eyes widening as he recognized the official markings. He looked from the deed to Elara, then to Abernathy, his blustering confidence beginning to deflate like a pricked balloon. Abernathy's face darkened, a vein pulsing in his temple. A trick! It changes nothing. The man is still a debtor and a vagrant, unfit to care for my kin. He is not a vagrant, Elara countered smoothly, pulling a second document from the folio. And as for his debts. She held up the paper for Abernathy to see. Elias recognized the letterhead of the bank that had foreclosed on his farm. This is a bill of sale for all outstanding notes and liens against the estate of the late Elias Thorne. I purchased his debt in full last week. Every last penny. He owes the bank nothing. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the dumbfounded audience. He owes me. And he is working to repay it. He is not a beggar, Master Abernathy. He is my employee, living and working on land that I own. You have no claim on him, and you have no claim on his children. A wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. The narrative had been violently, irrevocably rewritten. Abernathy stood there, his mouth slightly agape, his power and influence rendered utterly meaningless by 2 pieces of paper in the hands of a woman he had dismissed as a trifle. He was a king who had just discovered his castle was built on someone else's kingdom. Master Abernathy stared, his face a contorted mask of disbelief and impotent rage. He had built his world on the foundations of intimidation and assumed authority, and this quiet, resolute woman had just dynamited them. Without another word, he spun on his heel, mounted his horse, and rode away, a man defeated not by force, but by fact. Bailiff Thorne, looking utterly lost, mumbled an apology and scurried after him, the crowd of onlookers parting to let them pass. The silence they left behind was different. It was not the tense silence of judgment, but the stunned silence of recalculation. The townsfolk looked at Elara, at Elias, at the sturdy wagon, and saw not a scandal, but a fortress. They saw not a broken man, but one under the protection of a formidable and mysterious power. They dispersed slowly, their gossip now tinged with something akin to awe. In the days that followed, the atmosphere changed. The scorn was replaced by a grudging, wary respect. Elias, freed from the crushing shame of his perceived failure, threw himself into his work with a new heart. His axe blows were no longer frantic, they were measured, powerful, and purposeful. He was not chopping wood to survive the day, he was clearing a future. He carved out a space for a garden, built a sturdy pen for the chickens Elara had somehow procured, and reinforced the banks of the creek. He was a man not just working off a debt, but rebuilding his own worth, piece by piece. Elara, for her part, established a quiet dominion over their small world. She was the strategist, the quartermaster, the silent partner in his redemption. She taught the children, mended their clothes, and managed their resources with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. The wagon was no longer just a shelter, it was a home, filled with the low hum of life being lived, of a family being forged in the crucible of adversity. As summer bled into the golden hues of autumn, a fragile peace settled over the small homestead. The rhythm of their days became a comforting liturgy, the bite of Elias's axe in the morning, the laughter of the children in the afternoon, the quiet conversations beside the fire in the evening. The town of Blackwood Creek kept its distance, but its gaze was no longer hostile. It was watchful, curious. One evening, as the triplets slept soundly inside the wagon, Elias sat by the fire, sharpening his axe blade on a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape of steel on stone was the only sound. Ilara sat across from him, mending one of Leah's dresses. The question that had lived in the back of Elias's mind for months finally found its voice. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. "Not just the land. The debt." That was a fortune." Ilara didn't look up from her needlework. "It was," she agreed simply. She stitched in silence for a moment before continuing. "My father is a man much like Abernathy. Rich, powerful, and certain that the world and everyone in it belongs to him. He arranged a marriage for me to a man twice my age, a union of property, not people. I was to be another of his assets." She finally lifted her head, and in the firelight, Elias saw a profound and weary sorrow in her eyes. "The night before the wedding, I took my inheritance, a dowry my mother left me, and I ran. I rode for 3 days. And then I found you. I saw in your eyes the same trap I was fleeing. A cage made of circumstance and other people's expectations. I had the means to break one of us free. So I did." The confession was plain, unadorned, and more powerful for its simplicity. Elias looked at this woman who had seen his brokenness and answered it not with pity, but with action. He saw the runaway bride, the fierce strategist, the quiet protector. He saw the architect of his second chance. Far to the west, a line of dark, bruised clouds began to mass on the horizon, a gathering storm that promised more than just rain. The air grew heavy, charged with an unspoken premonition. The creek, their placid neighbor, seemed to murmur a little louder, its current quickening with a restless energy. The storm did not arrive, it descended. It came in the dead of night, a maelstrom of wind and water that tore at the world with a savage fury. The rain was not rain, it was a solid wall of water, a percussive onslaught that turned their small patch of land into a churning swamp. The creek, their gentle boundary, swelled with terrifying speed, its murmur becoming a deep, guttural roar. It became a monster, clawing at its banks, pulling trees and soil into its muddy, chaotic torrent. Elias and Ilara were jolted from sleep by the violent rocking of the wagon and the shriek of the wind. A glance outside revealed a nightmare. The water was already swirling around the wheels. "The children!" Elias yelled over the din, his voice swallowed by the storm's throat. They moved with a desperate, synchronized grace of people fighting for everything they have. Ilara grabbed the still sleeping children, wrapping them in blankets, while Elias forced the wagon door open against the force of the wind. The water was knee-deep and rising, its current a powerful, malevolent thing. He carried Caleb and Noah to the highest point of their land, a small, rocky knoll 50 yards away, the wind trying to rip them from his arms. He fought his way back for Ilara and Leah, the water now at his waist. Just as they reached the relative safety of the high ground, a sound like the cracking of a giant's bones split the air. They turned in horror to see the creek, now a full-blown river, lift their wagon as if it were a child's toy. Their home, their fortress, their entire world was swept into the raging current. It slammed into a massive oak tree, splintering with a sickening crunch. The sturdy canvas was torn away, and their possessions, flour, blankets, the children's slate, the deed to the land, were vomited into the churning water and swept away into the darkness. They could only watch, helpless and horrified, as the symbol of their new beginning was utterly obliterated, leaving them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the terrified children in their arms. Dawn broke on a scene of absolute devastation. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wounded, silent world. The creek had receded, but their land was a wasteland of mud, debris, and profound loss. The shattered remains of the wagon were wedged against the distant bank, a skeleton picked clean by the flood. Elias sat on the damp ground of the knoll, his children huddled against him for warmth, their small bodies trembling. He looked at the ruin around them, and a cold, familiar despair began to seep back into his bones. They had lost everything. Again. Ilara stood, her face pale but her back still straight, surveying the wreckage not with defeat, but with a grim assessment. As the grey morning light strengthened, a figure emerged from the mist that clung to the path from town. It was Silas, the blacksmith, a man whose face was usually set in a permanent scowl of concentration. He carried a heavy hammer in one hand and a coil of rope over his shoulder. He stopped a few yards away, his eyes taking in the scene. He didn't offer condolences. He simply looked at Elias and said, "Heard the creek took your home." Before Elias could respond, another figure appeared, then another. It was Martha, the baker, her arms laden with fresh bread wrapped in cloth. Then came two farmers, their sons in tow, carrying saws and stacks of rough-hewn timber. Soon, a small assembly of townspeople stood before them, the very same people who had once gathered to scorn them. They had seen the storm from the safety of their homes. They had witnessed the destruction. And they had made a choice. Silas the blacksmith took a step forward, his scowl softening into something that might have been respect. "Abernathy told everyone you were a flood," he said, his voice gruff. "Come to ruin the town. But we watched. You weren't the flood. You were the ones building on the banks. You build on solid ground this time." He dropped the rope at Elias's feet. "We'll help." Elias looked at the faces before him, worn, tired, and determined. He saw the offering in their hands and heard the truth in their words. The pride that had once been his tormentor, the fragile pride that had shattered so easily, was gone. In its place was a deep, quiet strength, a resilience forged in Ilara's fire and tempered by the flood. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat, and slowly got to his feet. He accepted the bread from Martha, the rope from Silas. He accepted their help. The days that followed were a testament to the quiet power of a community's changed heart. The destruction of the wagon became the birth of a home. The men of Blackwood Creek worked alongside Elias, their combined labor a rhythmic pulse of hammers and saws. They did not rebuild the wagon, they laid a stone foundation, solid and permanent. They raised walls and set rafters against the sky. The women of the town brought food, minded the children, and helped Ilara sort through what little could be salvaged, their shared tasks weaving a new fabric of acceptance and friendship. Master Abernathy was a ghost in his own town, his wealth and influence unable to buy back the respect he had so casually wielded and lost. His cruelty had been laid bare, and the community, in its simple, powerful way, had turned its back on him. Weeks turned into a month, and a small, sturdy house stood where the wagon had once been. It was not grand, but it was strong, rooted in the earth and cemented by the goodwill of their neighbors. On the day it was finished, Elias stood before it, holding a piece of smooth, sanded wood. He had spent the evenings carving it with his knife. He worked slowly, deliberately, shaping the letters. Ilara came and stood beside him, her presence a quiet affirmation. He held up the finished sign. It didn't say Thornport Ilara. It just said, home. He looked from the sign to the house, then to Caleb, Noah, and Leah, who were chasing each other in the yard, their laughter the sweetest sound he had ever known. He looked at Ilara, whose belief in him had been the foundation for it all. Home, he said again, the word full of a meaning he was only now beginning to understand. Their story is a powerful reminder that a home is not built from wood and nails, but from courage and connection. It shows us that true strength isn't the absence of hardship, but the will to rebuild in its wake, and that a family can be found in the most unexpected of places. If their journey from ruin to redemption moved you, and you want to see more stories of hope and resilience, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss the incredible tales we have in store.